Before we get started, just a quick note about something you hear at the end of the show. In the credits, I mentioned that Nate Schweber does the music. And don't worry, he still does. But I wanted to tell you that he's got a new album out. It's called Gaps, and it's available for download or in handy CD format. And I invite you to check out nateschweber.bandcamp.com to listen to snippets and to add it to your musical collection. Thanks for supporting independent musicians. And now, here's that familiar Nate tune to get us started. I'm John Holl. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. Tom Troncone of Muckraker Beermaker is my guest this week, and we're going to be talking about spontaneous beers, seltzers, and being a professional brewer as well as a fan. We're going to get to all of it in a minute, but on the line with me right now is Neil Callahan. He's the brand manager of Cigar City Brewing, which is the sponsor of this episode. Neil, thanks so much, and welcome to the show. We're talking about Highlight today.
Oh, yeah, always looking forward to talking Highlight with you, John.
So it's your flagship, but I'm curious as to what's made it an enduring favorite by the fans.
I think that Highlight IPA is a brand that really bridged the gap between where IPAs were in the early 2000s and early 2010s and where IPAs have gone in the year 2020. There's much more fruit-forward, kind of lower bitterness beers. Highlight IPA is a beer that does have that familiar bitterness of the sort of classic American IPAs, but it takes a back seat, and really the tropical qualities of the hops that we're using are front and center. And when the beer was released in 2009, it was really one of the first beers that really emphasized the fruit qualities of the hops, and the bitterness was really there playing a supporting role.
And so for the IPA fans that are used to some of the more juicier fruit-forward IPAs today, there's a lot of that characteristic in there, but also something for the old school drinkers as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It really connects those two sort of ends of the IPA spectrum.
Well, we're going to have more with Neil later on this show, but for now, I'm going to encourage you all to go check out cigarcitybrewing.com to learn more about Highlight IPA. I've known Tom Troncone since before I was writing about beer. We were competing reporters at newspapers in the New York metro area. The nature of our jobs, covering crime and breaking news, often meant that we'd be hanging out at crime scenes in the middle of the night. We were always friendly, but we'd work to beat each other's brains out in the paper the following day. When I started writing about beer, I discovered that Tom was a homebrewer as well as a big beer fan. He knew all the whales and where to find them, was at all of the important releases and bottle shares. And all along, he was harboring this idea of opening his own brewery, and finally decided that it was time to leave journalism behind and open Muckraker. It's based in northern part of New Jersey, where he can focus on spontaneous beers from his coolship, local ingredients, and barrel aging. And it occurred to me that this type of brewing was just right for an old ink-stained wretch like Tom. As reporters, we don't dictate the news, but simply follow the story where it goes. It makes sense to understand the beat you're covering so you can have context, but you just have to let events unfold. Spontaneous ales are like that. Nature, not a recipe, dictates the way. Tom stopped by my backyard a few weeks ago when the weather was warm and we could properly social distance while having a few pints. We're two old print guys finding our way, so there's a bit of newsroom talk, but also a lot of cool insight from a beer maker who still very much loves drinking beers from other breweries. And it occurred to me that I hadn't seen Tom since before the pandemic swept the country, so we started there. Here's our conversation.
Thank you, John.
The last time I saw you in person, you were pretty much near death.
This is true.
We were at the Big Beers, Belgians, and Barley Wines Festival, which is in Breckenridge, Colorado, which is a lot of B's to get through and then a C. And you got altitude poisoning.
I did.
And
it was a good time.
Was it?
No, it sucked. I never want to experience that again.
I saw you get progressively worse.
I felt
over
myself
the 4
get
days
progressively worse.
That we were there. But you were a trooper. You stood there in the hall and you're offering your beers. And I think you were just one of 3 Jersey breweries, right? Or 2 Jersey breweries. It's just you and James Priest from the Referent, right?
I don't know any others. I think Mike Kane was there.
Oh, Mike Kane was there. That's right. So 3.
Was Kane there? Yeah.
So you were trying to do Jersey proud. You're trying to do your brand proud. But you were pretty close to...
I actually was probably pretty close to death. Like my pulse ox was really low. I had to go to the hospital. They gave me oxygen. Not a fun memory. One of my.
You were getting oxygen before it was.
I had oxygen
Yeah.
delivered to the room. I had cans of oxygen. I had those little stupid like one-shot oxygen things. I was staying hydrated. I was drinking coconut milk. I was doing every goddamn thing you could think of, and I still have I won't mention the guy's name because I'm still mad at him, but I remember being on the floor. We had dinner the first night, and someone was talking about their beautiful new watch that could tell your pulse ox. And the last day when we were doing the tasting, I was the only one at the booth. I was hurting real bad, and I could tell that there was something really wrong. And the dude walked by. I'm like, oh my god, dude, can I please like take my pulse ox? I think it's really bad right now. And he goes, nah, I think it'll throw off my stats, and like refused to do it.
Man.
And I was like, God, man, that's the worst. Then I was in the hospital like 2 hours later. But then luckily I had friends out there who carried all my beer back to the room, and
Yeah.
they ended up. Bill Young at lambic.info ended up with like a sixtel of like the framboise. And he was drinking it in his basement. I was like, oh, at least someone got something out of it.
So that was January.
That was January.
Yeah. How's your year been since then?
Everything's peaceful and calm in
Yeah.
the world.
How's
and,
your pandemic going?
I've been blessed in a way. We're up in Sussex County, which is probably the least populous county in New Jersey. I don't know how to compare us to like Cumberland, but
So you're at the top of the state.
I'm the northernmost brewery in New Jersey, in the
Okay.
northwest corner where like it meets New York and to a lesser extent Pennsylvania. But we live in Bergen County, which was like, one of the initial hotspots. So I drive up there every day, and it was nice to be able to drive up to the country every day. And, I'm the only one at the brewery, most days.
Right.
So it was like either I was going to sit home and do nothing or be at the brewery by myself. It was really no different than, than being isolated somewhere. But it was interesting because starting in like March, for the first like 4 weeks maybe, people were buying more beer than they knew what to do with. I have a friend who runs a liquor store, fairly high volume. They were doing 3 times their volume. And, you're talking like $3 million a week.
Yeah.
Obviously we weren't doing that on our like 200 barrel a year
Business model.
Yeah, exactly. But it was when I think back to March, I think of walking out into the parking lot. I had a barrel set up, and I would walk out. It had like winter jacket on. It's like sleeting. It's like 14 degrees, and like leaving with a mask, leaving a bag of beer or a box of beer on top of the barrel as someone like kind of emerged from their car, didn't really want to get eye contact or too close, like thank you. It was the worst. And then everyone in April, they basically realized, holy shit, we bought a lot of beer. And it kind of slowed down. And then when they let us open up outside in the beer garden in June, that helped a lot. We have that until mid-November. It's going to start getting pretty cold up there. We're in this old quarry where the wind just whips through. So it's going to get kind of cold come December. So, the hard part right now is, what do? Are bars going to be open? Should you put a lot of beer in kegs? Should you put a lot of beer in bottles? Should you expect to just have to-go growler sales or crowler sales and bottle sales? Are you going to be stuck with like all these kegs of beer? It's hard to know what, January, December, February, March looks like.
So I mentioned this before we started in the introduction of the show, but I've known you for a lot of years. I've known you outside of beer. In fact, I first met you when we were both newspaper reporters.
Yeah, I think it's like 16 years.
It's been a while. Yeah. And you're one of the very, very few people from my old life that I knew professionally that I know in this new life professionally.
Same.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So you sort of make the jump to that. But before you became a brewer or blender, you were a beer fan. A background.
I still am a beer fan.
And I want to talk about that. Yeah, but you didn't have a background. Journalism is not necessarily a background that people jump from into beer making.
But it is a background where you consume a lot of beer.
Yeah, or alcohol in general.
Correct.
Yes. Most of the better newsrooms are better stocked than some of the finest bars in the country.
Yeah, and I worked at a digital organization that had a drinking problem. They had an Irish pub in the center of their headquarters with flowing taps.
Really?
So, yeah.
Where was this?
Patch and AOL, when AOL owned Patch.
Yeah.
If you went to the headquarters of Patch on, I think it was 777 Broadway, I think it was that building. It may have been a different building. They had a second one across the street. And in the center of it wasn't really a newsroom because it was more the technical side and marketing and all that. But the center of it was an Irish pub with actual, booths. And this guy, Josh Cotton, really good homebrewer, made beer that they served on tap there. And they used to, when journalists would come, and they'd have reporters in, they'd joke and say, they would not entirely be truthful and say, oh, no, they're just for show. They weren't just for show. Those things had beer flowing in it.
I feel like that'd be really dangerous. I've still resisted putting in a kegerator here or a draft system here at the house just because...
We're talking 2014. It's not like we're talking 2002.
Yeah. But making the jump, though, so you're not unfamiliar with drinking, certainly. But a lot of folks who get into it, come from, have a science background, or at least an interest in science. Journalism is not science. In fact, by and large, we usually stay away from working on math equations and things of import. But where did the idea come from making the jump from journalism to homebrewing? Because this is a second career for you as well. This isn't something that you just did journalism for 3 years and decided that
it's 24 years.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is a second career for you.
Yeah, I'll do this for 24 years and just throw some dirt over me and we're good.
Why make the jump?
So
it's your cell phone that I forgot to ask you to silence before we started. Yeah.
I would say the interesting thing, though, is that when you're a journalist, you have to become an instant expert on things almost every day, right? Depending what your beat is. Yeah. And I think that natural curiosity lends itself to exploration into, wild fermentation and wanting to not just, journalists aren't cookie cutter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And generally we're a pretty interesting bunch of people. But truth be told, my best friend growing up and I were always super competitive. If you put us in a room with nothing, within like 5 minutes, we'd have a game, we'd have rules, we'd be arguing about the rules, we'd be, best of 5. When that carried on in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way. And I went to his house one day and he was like, dude, I brewed a batch of beer. It's about 12 years ago, something like that. And, I was like, you brewed a what? I have to brew a batch of beer now. So, I started with
it's a game of one-upmanship.
I started with extract brewing and, 12 years ago, and it quickly moved to all grain. It quickly, I quickly pissed off my girlfriend by boiling off or pasteurizing a kettle sour on the kitchen stove, which I don't recommend because it's kind of like if you took vomit and put it in a dirty baby diaper and then lit it on fire, and then picture it sticking on your walls for 12 weeks or something. So she kicked me outside, which actually was a blessing because I was able to get bigger equipment, and I got an old maple syrup evaporating pan, maple sap evaporating pan to use as an outdoor coolship, and I put it under my trees in the spring and stuff when they were blossoming. And that's kind of started my foray into spontaneous fermentation. But I don't know, man. It's journalism kind of. I would hate to be a journalist right now. I got to be honest with you. It's my last my last bit of journalism was at NJ.com.
Yeah. Which used to be the Star Ledger, which used to be
the Star Ledger.
Newspaper. Yeah.
Used to be a great newspaper.
Yeah. I worked there for a time.
But you did. And the interesting thing was, you'd have a reporter write a story about, I don't know, some inane topic. But a third comment Am I allowed to curse here?
Sure. Yeah. No, you already have. So I've already put the E on the.
Oh, sorry.
On the iTunes.
I can't talk without cursing.
No, that's fucking fine.
But the you write a third comment, it would be like, "You fucking cock." And like, whoa, what are you talking about? It's like, we just write a story. It's about the library putting extra books in or something, you know. It used to be years ago when I was starting my career as a kid at the Herald News. People would come into the front entrance and they'd be like, "Hey, Tom, there's someone for you in the lobby." And you'd walk out and they'd be like, "Hey, I read your story yesterday. You know, I'm not entirely sure you were completely fair." I'm like, "Oh, really? Well, you know," and you'd have a discussion with the person and they'd make good points and, you know, because you're in person. And, you know, I think it was Mike Tyson said, the internet, social media has made people all too comfortable with being disrespectful to other people without the fear of getting punched in the face.
It's true.
And I was like, you know what? Iron Mike's right. But it just kind of, the world changed. But now, you know, people come in and they're having beers, they're smiling, laughing, having a good time. You know, the toxicity and downsizing and small-minded ownership and all that bullshit for the last 10 years, you know, publishers who didn't know what the hell they were doing, corporate structures that just stifled every bit of creativity and fun and launched things like Fun Club so that you could have forced fun. You know, I'm done with all that shit. We're just gonna make beer and have a good time until this ride's over.
It's interesting to me, though. Yeah, no, you actually reminded me when people would show up at the newsroom. I worked out in Indianapolis at the Indy Star, and at the bottom of all the articles at this point in time, they would put your name and your phone number, and it would just simply say, "Call Star reporter John Holl at 317-444."
Double use of the word "star" there, by the way.
I know. That's yeah. And and whatever the last four digits were, and there'd be a guy named Bob, I want to say, who would take it literally. So after he was done reading an article in that day's paper, he would call you, and he would just say, "Hi, this is Bob checking in." It's like, "Thanks, Bob," and like that's it. But you could hear like the phone go, like if you knew the layout of the paper that day, you could hear him sort of jump from reporter to reporter around the newsroom. And then it was always sort of this really tough thing if he didn't call you, because it means that he got bored somewhere in your story. And
he
then
jumped out.
And then didn't get to the end
out
and
of
the
story.
instructions to
right tighter,
to call.
John. Right tighter.
So I had a pretty good Bob ratio, but it was my metrics were pretty strong.
I mean, the
on
days.
that.
You know, I was a crime reporter for the first 10 years, and then I was an editor for like 15.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be sitting in a newsroom, and like, you get a phone call. The person next to you, your editor gets a phone call, and like it's just someone saying, "Tell that Troncone motherfucker he'll be dead by midnight." And you're like, "Oh, okay." You know, let's call the Passaic Police because But, you know.
Those were always fun calls, like when I'd get like calls from the security department being like, "Have you noticed anything suspicious around you?" And of course, I'm at a bar somewhere, and it was like, I don't know, probably.
I had my life threatened 3 times, though. It's not that bad. 24 years, 3 times is not that bad.
Did you have guns pulled on you?
Once.
Yeah, me too.
Once in one of the old housing projects in Patterson, I was, young and said, "Hey, let's go do a story on the mechanisms of like the drug dealing operation and like where the sentries are and like, how the money is moved around." And,
it's an ambitious story and it's necessary.
Especially
but
if you just walk up and start asking those questions, So, they very politely told me with a gun to not come back. And I didn't, for a couple of days. And then I just sort of kept my distance a little bit.
I was covering something. It was a benign story, like a plane crash or something that happened in a neighborhood down in Mercer County somewhere. It was like rural Mercer County. And I'm knocking on doors to just see, did anybody hear anything when the plane was going down, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm walking up a driveway. The lights are on in the house, but the lights are off on the porch. And I figure, all right, like one of the last stops of the night. I've gotten some good stuff, but this house is within the radius. Ooh, look at you opening up a foamy fun thing. And I get pretty close to the front door, and I see a burning cigarette ember. And I hear the very unmistakable chunk of a shotgun being primed. And then a voice saying, "State your business." And I pull out my press credentials, and I announce who I am and why I'm there, and say, sir, would you like to tell me about what you might have heard with this plane crash or seen with this plane crash? And there's the longest silence of my life, which was only probably in reality about 2 or 3 seconds, and the voice simply says, "Nope, don't think I want to do that." I said, "Thank you very much, sir," and I walked backwards off of this front walk, like got in my car, shook for a couple of minutes, and then called the desk with my notes and said, "Okay, I'm going home."
I was threatened with arrest more than I was threatened with death.
By cops?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I was a police reporter. So.
Oh yeah, no, I was as well. I don't know if I ever got threatened with arrest.
Yeah, I had a mouth.
Yeah, well, you do. All right, so you're a beer maker now.
I am.
And I'm curious because there's so many different paths that you can go on as a beer maker, you have chosen spontaneous as your path to walk. With some divergence, but by and large, I think I'd consider you to be a spontaneous, rooted in tradition, but certainly not afraid to screw around. What originally drew you to that? Is that the writer in you? Is there a romance that comes with spontaneous? Is it?
I just fell in love with spontaneous. I think, back up for a second. I make like maybe first year was like 1/3 spontaneous. Hopefully this year is going to be about half spontaneous.
Okay.
And hopefully it grows from there. But I also make like a lot of farmhouse ales and fruited sours and things like that. Brett beers, etc. I make a wild IPA. I make some coolship seltzers. But I don't know. I just love the taste of spontaneous beer, and I love what goes into making it. There's both technical skill on the front end, and then a lot of artistry on the back end in terms of making blends and taking meticulous notes on each of the barrels, and knowing which barrels are going to work well with which barrels on which fruit for re-fermentation. There's it's, I don't want to say it's all art, and I don't want to say it's all science, but it's fairly sciencey in the sense of, but it's also in a way it's forgiving, because if you have no control over something, or minimal control over something, or minimal intervention on something, if you have enough barrels, and you're getting good spontaneous, picking up good microbes, good microflora in your coolship, you have the right cooling rate, you're doing a really a good turbid mash, a good long boil, you got some good aged hops with a lot of beta still left in them, you're going to be able to put together some interesting beers. But it all comes from drinking Cantillon or Dre Fontana or Girardin, and just having my palate opened up to those beers just changed my drinking. And I always tell people I make beer, I make what I like to drink, and it's not just because I'm selfish. I'm a little bit, but I don't want people to tell me what to do, kind of thing, right? It's like I always tell people it's like the scene from American Beauty, when she's going through the drive-through, and she's like getting handsy with the real estate king,
okay,
and Spacey's working the drive-through, and he says to her, "You don't get to tell me what to do ever again." I'm kind of like that with the world right now, right? I spent 24 years being told what to do, and I'm done. But I also tell people, you're not necessarily buying the beer, you're buying my palate, So I want to make beers that I know how to drink, if that makes any sense.
It does.
I know what a good goose tastes like. I haven't made one yet because I haven't been around long enough to have 1, 2, and 3-year-old. And I had to use all my spontaneous last year just to for production.
Keep going.
Right. So hopefully this year I can save a couple barrels for a goose for like when I'm 50. But
that's something, though. It is the long game. You're already talking about 24 years of the old job, and now 24 years of this one, which it's a nice goal, and but what you're doing, you can't help but think in long terms, right? I mean, it's so many of the IPA brewers these days, or the quick kettle sour turn and burns, they're living 2.5 week life cycles. That's their window. Is it freeing to think about the long term? Is it worrisome to think about the long term? Is it, I don't know, somewhere
It's
in the middle?
amazing how quickly the long term gets there. You put a beer in a barrel last year, and all of a sudden that beer's already a year old. It's like, holy shit, where'd that year go? This fever dream year we've had maybe is a little different, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I love those. I mean, when I'm out anywhere, you can find me drinking a Pilsner.
Sure.
I mean, because you're not going to find, unless I go down to visit James at Referend, or, in this area, I'm not really going to find, spontaneous beer. And I don't really do kettle sours. In this, they can be good. When I used to make them at home, I would put them in an oak barrel with Brett, so to build some complexity into it. But I know a lot of breweries can't do that, obviously.
Yeah.
But I get the one note lactic sour, and I just, okay, I get it. But a well-made Pilsner,
Yeah.
I mean,
you're talking to the right show.
It's just there's not a more beautiful thing in the world. So, I can't wait for the day where hopefully, if anyone's listening who has a few $1 million,
I can assure you that they're not.
I want to open a clean side somewhere up on Route 23 in Franklin, or up that way, and keep my barrel facility and as the sour program and the coolship and the barrel facility for the wild program. But I'd love to have a, where I can do Pilsners and big barrel-aged imperial stouts and things like that. And IPA here and there. I mean, I enjoy them.
It's usually people who start the other way, though.
I know. It's because you need the ATM to really do the sour side.
Yeah.
And like when you start with my side, you don't really get that ATM enough to save like $2 million to open up a big clean brewery. So that's why you start that way. I did it backwards because, I just want to make and drink this beer.
So you're a beer fan, and you're still a beer fan.
I mean, you better be. If you're not a fan of beer, what are you doing?
But that's interesting. You still seek out bottles from other places. You
Absolutely.
Still travel for beer, even when you're not pouring your own.
Not as much because it's harder now. I mean, we've basically been persona non grata in the rest of the world for like the better part of a year now.
The United States, not your brewery.
The United States, yeah.
I was going to say, what did you do to get blacklisted?
So I was supposed to spend like a good 2 weeks in Belgium in April. I was actually going to be pouring. It was me, DeGard, Oxbow, and Allagash were the 4 breweries who were supposed to pour at the Night of the Great Thirst.
How'd you get invited to that?
I've gotten to know Yves Peniel, who's the president of the Good Society and one of the owners of Grote Dorst, fairly well. He and I went to Allagash last year while we were up at Ebenezer's in Lovell, which is like kind of my home away from home.
Okay. It's a great bar.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I definitely I would say I like to travel, and I don't necessarily travel for beer anymore. But if I'm traveling anywhere, I'm seeking out beer. Except when I go to Belgium. I was supposed to, it was Quintessence at Cantillon. It was the open beer days, or the days of the twists at Dre. We had a Cantillon wine grape lambic tasting at dinner at Fooder. At Mooter. There were so many things. I was going to hang out with the guys from Antidote. I was going to see Raph from Bachrider. I mean, I had a fun 2 weeks planned. So yeah, I mean, it's fun. I hope the brewery is successful enough in the next couple of years, that I can basically spend a month in Belgium every year.
More in just a moment, but first, this episode is made possible by Cigar City Brewing. If you haven't had a High Life IPA in a while, what's stopping you? It's the great IPA you remember, with tropical fruit accents, just the right amount of bitterness, and a proper 7.5% ABV. Pick some up today and learn more at cigarcitybrewing.com. And now, back to Tom Troncone of Muckraker Beermaker. How much do those trips now feed into what you put back into the brewery? Like, because you've been open for, I guess, just over a year now.
A little over a year.
But in the lead up to it, you were brewing batches and you were really starting to think about how much of what you experience, over the last 2-3 years of travel has directly fed into the brewery versus what you were doing on your travels beforehand.
I would say that this is 2019, would be out there. 17, I guess 2017, Night of the Great Thirst in Lovell, Maine, was probably, if I didn't go up there for that, I probably wouldn't have a brewery today. It was one of those things where I met the right people. It just felt right. I started really, really learning about, spontaneous fermentation, drinking some of the best lambics on planet Earth. And it became like a couple year crash. I mean, I had been making spontaneous beer before that, but after that, it just became like all encompassing, like a complete crash course in spontaneous fermentation. And I would say that coupled with Quintessence the following year, and drinking all those cantillons, which is probably the biggest inspiration, honestly, is if I make a grape amlam, my reference points are Saint Lamb and Vig and all those Sophia, all those big beautiful Cantillon grape lambics. And the blending as well. I mean, Raph at Bach has been a huge help and a huge inspiration, because he was someone I could lean on as I was getting the brewery going to answer questions about barrel rinsing and minutia of like spacing out like the floors to get totes through the barrels and all that jazz.
Yeah.
But he really showed me, if you take a beautiful lambic, if you get Girardin lambic and de Troc or whatever, Lindemans, but Girardin especially, and you blend it with one of Danny's saisons from Fantôme, and then you go out to the Rhineland and you hand select some barrels from vineyards that have been there from the 1300s, and then you go and find super overripe, red vineyard peaches like somewhere in Germany, and you do that blend and you put it in that barrel and you put on those peaches, sourcing the ingredients and raised it, brought it to another level. And, so yeah, I mean, you take inspiration from, I didn't take inspiration from a business plan, put it that way. I didn't take inspiration from how can we make some money. I took inspiration from, these beers are amazing. How do I do this? And
but see, so that's the thing, right? Because you can't replicate somebody else's business plan. We've seen breweries try to do that or try to replicate their marketing plans, and it sort of feels inauthentic. But so much of it, I think, for what you're trying to do and what you have been doing, is you have to be sort of rooted in your place, and you have to, love and accept the place that you're in, because you'll never be in downtown Brussels. You'll never be, in various parts of Belgium or wherever. Like you're going to be where you are. And I think one of the great beauties of so many of these lambic breweries, lambic producers, have been, they use what's around them, and they've embraced, their microflora. They've embraced, their place. When you were trying to decide where to open up, were you thinking about that? Were you thinking about where you wanted to put down your roots?
Absolutely. And I knew I wanted to do it somewhere that was wooded, that had a lot of forests, that had a lot of farmland, had a rich farming tradition.
Pass that bottle.
It's almost done.
That's all right.
Might be a little chunky. Had a rich farming tradition, and I knew I would hoped I would get quality microflora. And I have, I think. You're drinking a beer right now that's 100% spontaneous, Amlam traditional method spontaneous beer.
With added vanilla.
With a little added vanilla, yeah.
It almost comes off as coconut oil in this.
Interesting.
I was trying to place what it was. Like my first instinct was vanilla, but then I started getting, like food grade coconut oil, not, we're going down to Sandals for the weekend.
No, it's Mexican vanilla.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I get all my grain from New Jersey. All my grain comes from Rabbit Hill Malt Farm down in Cumberland County. I try to get as much fruit as I can from New Jersey. We lost our peach crop in northern New Jersey this year. So I had to go down to the furthest south I've ever been, like on the Delaware River, to get peaches this year.
Okay.
There were like Confederate flags flying. I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, the furthest south that I've ever been on the Delaware is Deepwater, which is a company town right underneath the Delaware Memorial Bridge that like 3M owns. And it's where chemicals go to die or essentially be dumped.
Well,
and they
not
tried
really
to get
to
rid of
die.
VX gas a couple of years ago. In this place, and so it's
So
that's my old
I
reporting.
went a
days
little
as well,
further.
yeah.
I went a little further south from the peach farm because I was really close to the Delaware Bay, and I came to a little beach town on the Delaware Bay. I didn't even know there were little beach towns on the Delaware Bay, and there was one of them that I was like, oh, let's check this out. And there was this like giant like Confederate flag, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn around and drive back north. I didn't realize we were south of the Mason-Dixon line. Anyway, so and Nirvana lasted longer than Confederacy.
Yikes.
Anyway,
It's true.
But yeah, I mean, the idea of, I got all my peaches from New Jersey, all my nectarines from New Jersey, all my blueberries come from a blueberry farm in Hamilton. All my blackberries came from a blackberry farm in Hamilton. My blueberries came from down there. I try to use as much real, whole, local fruit as possible whenever I can. It kind of, I do use European hops just because I want that noble hop in some of the beers. The spontaneous beers do not matter as much because you really just want the beta acids, you want the alpha acids aged out of them. But yeah, I mean, sense of place is important, and Franklin, where I am, is an old mining town. So one of the first beers I made was a grisette, which was the beer of the Saison was the beer of the farmers. Grisette was the beer of the miners,
Yeah.
So
How'd that go over? Because I was up there one of your first opening weekends, and the town council came walking in, and I saw them before you did, and they were talking to somebody else, and the guy's looking at the list, one of the council members, he said, I don't see Guinness on here. Where's the Guinness? And then you came out, and you're like, oh, well, how you doing? Welcome. And the guy's like, oh, do you have any like Guinness? And you're like, well, actually, we make everything here, and this is what we have. And you opened up in an area that might not be ready for grisettes.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know how much of the country is actually ready for grisettes.
It's everyone's ready for a grisette. But look, I mean, you go.
I want to see that on a T-shirt. Yeah.
As soon as you go 10 minutes north of me, or 15 minutes north of me, and you're in New York State. Drownlands is up there, and they're making amazing beers that
they've been on the show.
Yeah. Okay. You have. We're still on a Wappinger Fall, Ober Creek, Hudson Valley and Suarez and
all right, I stand
and
corrected.
Plan B. No, my point is not being stand corrected. It's that has not been what you described there has not been my overall experience. Every now and then someone comes in and either they leave like a half empty beer and go, and you realize that this wasn't the kind of beer they were hoping for. But more often than not, I find that, look, there's 122 breweries in New Jersey now, I believe. 120 of them can make, just two of us make all wild beer. Now, I'm anxiously awaiting, and Mike Kane, if you're listening, can you please start releasing beers from your wild program?
I can assure you that Mike Kane isn't listening to this show.
If anything, someone please get word to Mike Kane and start releasing beer from the Wild program, because a rising tide lifts all boats. People get more exposure to this type of beer, then they're going to seek it out. And that's what my experience is. I get a lot of people come in and say, I had my first this, or I had my first wild beer, or I had my first mixed culture beer.
So are you saying you need the larger producers at this point? Because, Mike Kane and his great brewery, I don't necessarily think of them when it comes to wild spontaneous or, anything, because, the program isn't necessarily off the ground. I've had some delicious beers from them that have been outside of their norms, but I think people go there for the IPAs, they go there for the stouts, they go there for
now, because you haven't had an opportunity to have any of those beers yet,
right? But what I'm saying is, so do you need somebody who hasn't released something yet to raise up your profile of something that you've been doing now for the better part of a year?
I don't know if we need it. I think that the more people who make this type of beer, the more exposure people get to it. Look, if I never had a Cantillon, right?
Yeah.
I would probably not know that I should seek out Oxbow's Native Wild. It's a kind of a thing where once you get the taste for the beer, which you get the taste for any beer, when I remember when I first fell in love with Pilsners, it was like, oh, who makes these? And it's
everybody.
Well, not everyone. Who makes these well? Not everyone.
Who stands out in your mind in the Pilsner game?
In New Jersey?
No,
I'm going to tell you in New Jersey.
All right.
I love Parking Lot Pils from Hackensack.
Okay.
I love the Pilsner from Mudhen. They're in Wildwood.
Okay.
It's a brew pub in Wildwood. They were pouring next to me in Morristown, and I probably had 15 of them. Smaller.
Sure.
15
small. 15 small pours. Yeah. 15 ounces. Yeah. It wasn't even a
It
pint.
was probably closer to 30. I like I went to a Verst bar in Jersey City.
Yeah.
Like last, I don't even know when it was. It could have been January, and it feels like 3 years ago now. And they had flown in the real Pilsner Urquell. And
that was it was down the street from my old apartment.
I just sat there and just boom, one after the other, with some brats and some Pilsner Urquell. I mean,
that's a great way of doing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's I had the Kane Pilsner. I forget the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they've made too many of them, but the one that he did was delicious. Twin Elephant did an Italian Pilsner that was really good.
Thank you, Justin Kennedy. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know who's that.
That's a joke from another show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I host like 9 podcasts, and they all start to bleed together after a while.
Oxbow's the Lupola Italian Pilsner. That kind of dry hop Pilsner vibe that's going on now a little bit, the noble dry hop Pilsner vibe.
All right, well, that's a good list.
Yeah, I mean, it could go on. I can go on and on. Bierstadt.
Well, open up that beer. Well, sure, obviously Bierstadt, but yeah. Open up that beer while we're talking, because I'm curious about... We've been talking a lot of, like, tradition, a lot of place, a lot of... When you first got into this and announced that you were going pro, and I started talking to you about what your business plan was going to be, because you were always the guy who would invite me to, Boca Rider shares, or, and like you had to have, things that nobody else had. And I don't have those. Like, I don't get access to, like, the cool guy beers.
You should though. You could.
I maybe, but I don't, and I didn't. But I started thinking of you as this very, serious, traditional, wanted to be rooted in tradition kind of brewer. And then I visited your brewery shortly after it opened, and I was like, all right, this is what Tom's doing. And I dig that. And then almost out of nowhere, you start doing batshit crazy things like, tomato and pepper beers, and like white pepper beers, not just garden pepper, but like, the spice. And then you're doing slushies, and now you're doing coolship hard seltzers. The circle didn't square with what I thought you were going to do. And I'm curious as to if that was part of the plan all along, or is this just part of your, I'm in my second career, I don't have to answer to anybody, I don't give a fuck kind of thing?
Yes. First of all, there was no plan. Second of all, I want to have fun. It's the same way folks don't necessarily make a lot of spontaneous beers, right, or mixed culture beers around the area. You know, what if you took a mixed culture beer and put it in, or a spontaneous beer, and put it in a slushy machine, you know, and
people were
add a
doing
little
that,
bit of
but they're
sugar.
doing that with kettle sours, or they're
Right.
doing that with
I did it with
IPAs
this
or
beer.
stuff.
The beer you're drinking right now,
Okay.
I put in a slushy machine with a little bit of sugar, and people were losing their minds over it. It was like this bright red. It's a framboise.
Are there currants in this, or is
No,
it
it's
just
a framboise.
raspberry?
Yeah.
Raspberry.
Oh, it's raspberries and Montmorency cherries.
Okay. Because it has that sort of tannic.
Mm-hmm.
The skins really sort of pop in here, which was making me think of currants for a minute.
And there's also maple syrup and cider syrup from a small family farm in Vermont, and some vanilla.
Okay. You like vanilla?
I like vanilla in berry beers. I think vanilla works really nicely with berries. I think it cuts through the acidity. It adds like a roundness to it, whereas you're not just drinking a dry, acidic, astringent beer. Not that it's always going to be astringent, not that it's really astringent, but like you add that vanilla, just sort of mellows out the sourness of it. It makes it, I think, really tasty.
At what point?
But I'm going to answer your other question first.
All right, answer the other question.
But like the coolship seltzer, it's like, okay, I have a coolship. I want to make seltzers because why not? And the seltzer I brought for you to drink today, essentially went through the coolship, and then I fermented out with a mixed culture, and then re-fermented it on the spent raspberries from this beer. So it was a spontaneous beer. The raspberries were sitting there. Pulled that beer off the raspberries and put the seltzer. You know, you call it a seltzer. I mean, I guess we have to. It's actually a malt beverage, but you know, where's the line? I have one right now. I have two right now. 51% seltzer, air quotes, and one is 49% unpasteurized cider for a co-ferment, and the other one is I put like in one barrel like 100 pounds of old vine Zinfandel grapes with the Kvike seltzer. So I don't know, man. You just have fun, you know. We're all gonna die. Have fun.
At what point, though, do we get to, with vanilla and maple syrup and everything being added, at what point are we into pastry
sours?
Yeah.
Pastry sours,
yeah.
Huh? I mean, I love pastry sours. I love the...
Alex Levingo was on the show from Barntown. We were talking about this. Yeah.
I love the... Not necessarily... I don't know. I hate the term pastry. I like the idea of sweet and sour playing off each other, you know? I've always loved that flavor combination of sweet and sour.
Yeah. You
know, sweet and sour chicken or sweet tarts or whatever.
Sure.
And I think that works really well in sour beer. You add a little sweetness to it, and now it adds a little complexity. B, it makes it eminently more drinkable.
Yeah. What's the cocktail that's sweet and sour? It's like sour mix and
whiskey sour.
Yeah,
no.
you go whiskey sour, a Midori sour, or something like that. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think a lot of cocktails play off of sweet and sour.
Yeah.
But yeah,
not a ton of beer.
I made an old fashioned beer. It was called Old Fashioned. It was a mixed culture. It was basically a farmhouse ale, saison, whatever you want to call it. Put it in a gin barrel with like 50 pounds of cracked green olives. You know, and I released it for New Year's Eve last year, and it was called Should Old Acquaintance.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I saw the reviews of it. People dug it.
If you like dirty martinis, you love it. If you don't like dirty martinis, you're gonna hate it.
1 star. 1 star. I'm allergic to olives.
I mean, don't get me started.
I'll save it for.
I don't want to be controversial, John.
Oh, why start now? Yeah. So I think the key takeaway, as I say, thanks for being on the show from you, is that we're all going to die one day.
I don't know. That's the key takeaway. If you didn't know that already, I would. I mean, at the end of the day, what are they going to say? Oh, Tom made a lot of money, or are they going to say, man, Tom left behind some pretty good beer? I mean,
are you building your beers to age? Do you want your beers to outlive you?
I don't know if I want them to outlive me. I mean, that's kind of.
Well, I mean, I'm
I'd
talking,
like
40, 50, 60 years.
Some of the beers. I do two types of spontaneous beers. I do a traditional method because I'm not into the méthode traditionnelle. You know, we have English word. We speak English here. We have English words. We can use them. It's a traditional method. And
weren't some of the more serious brewers in the country behind that though?
Yeah, I mean, but you know, that's fine.
All right.
But to me, it's like I had this conversation with Eve when we were driving to Allagash. You know, he just said to me, he goes, "You just can't call it lambic." You know, I was like, "All right, we have our own words." You know, I don't make a Berliner Weisse.
Yeah.
I make a tart wheat beer. Why? Because I'm not from Berlin, and we have our own word for wheat.
Yeah.
You know, it's
okay.
You know, why is it méthode traditionnelle? It's a traditional method, but also, which is the really traditional method, you know, lambic style beer. And then I make a what I call contemporary. I kind of started using the term contemporary method, which is more of a, you know, single infusion, short boil, pre-acidified in a coolship to drop the pH to a level that enteric bacteria it can't thrive, so that you can turn those beers around in like, you know, 6 months, 7 months. Basically, you know, I've had some brewers walk me through that method who use it, and it's really successful. So the contemporary method, traditional stuff, contemporary method, spontaneous stuff, you know, that's probably not going to age. But that turbid mash, long boil, you know, year plus in a punch in, you know, to me, the wine grape ones, you know, you could drink those in, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Sure. I wouldn't do that with the fruit forward ones because fruit tends to fade, you know, or, you know, a raspberry will become more acidic over time, or, you know, stone fruit, same way. But in the wine grapes, especially, you know, are made that those beers will go 25, 30 years if they go a day.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, they'll probably be better in 10 years. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple different types of methods in making it spontaneous that either if you're going to age or just kind of like you want to get that. It's almost like a kettle sour, except it's spontaneous, you know.
Well, perfect. I think we're at the end of this.
Oh,
well, hang out.
Does that mean we have to stop drinking?
No, hang out and have another beer.
We should just like let it keep recording as we're drinking, and just so it picks up just bullshit.
I think that was like 3 magazine podcasts ago, but yeah, it's great to see you again. You look considerably more alive, even though we're all going to die one day. But you look so much better than when the last time I saw you. So thanks for.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
because
that's called bringing it back around.
You like that?
Yeah, good job.
In journalism parlance, this is called the kicker.
Ah, quite professional, John.
And Tom lived happily ever after.
We'll see.
That's my old pal Tom Troncone. There's always a worry I have when friends start making beer, because if it's shitty, I'm going to have to tell them so, and then I might lose a friend. Thankfully, Tom is making beers that are not only inventive and flavorful, but fun to drink. If you're not a local, make plans to visit New Jersey soon and to check out his brewery. We talked about this a little last week, but it's also worth repeating. We're in a tough time with the pandemic, and this is also a time of year with a lot of stresses. Please take the time to check in with yourself and others. You're not alone in feeling the pressures of the day, and it's okay to ask for help if you need it. There are people who are here for you and want to lend a hand. I also want to thank you for listening, and I want to remind you to reach out with questions, suggestions, or more. And you can reach me at John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or on Twitter at John_Holl. Beer Edge is online at beeredge.com, and there you can subscribe to the newsletter and check out the podcast hosted by Andy Crouch. And we're also on all of the social medias as well, at The Beer Edge. Nate Schwarber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo. Tune in to Steal This Beer every Monday to hear my deep sighs, and monthly to the BYO Nano podcast, where I talk shop with small brewers. Before we go, as promised, Neil Callahan, he's the brand manager of Cigar City Brewing, is back with me right now, and my thanks to the brewery for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Neil, when it comes to Jai Alai, what hops are you using, and what sort of flavors do they bring out?
We've got 6 different hop varieties in Jai Alai. We've got some of the more traditional American hop varieties, the Cascade, Centennial, some CTZ for those high alpha acids, does have that bittering. But then Simcoe is really the star of the show. It's what we dry hop Jai Alai IPA with, and that's where we're getting a lot of those candied orange, tropical sort of nectarine, tangerine qualities. It's phenomenal.
I'm a big fan of IPA and food pairings, and I'm curious as to, in your mind, where Jai Alai really excels when it comes with pairing with food.
For my money, Jai Alai IPA and shrimp pad thai knocks it out of the park every single time. Does have enough caramel and enough body to balance out some of the heat that you'll get in the pad thai, but it allows for a lot more of the nuance to come out of the dish. And the tropical qualities of the beer, it's just like squeezing a little bit of orange over the dish. It's really wonderful.
Finally, give us the stats on this beer.
It's 7.5% ABV, 65 IBUs, 6 different hop varieties, tropical, balanced, phenomenal beer.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks to Cigar City Brewing for being this episode's sponsor. You should head out and get some Jai Alai today, and you can learn more at cigarcitybrewing.com. And that's it for this week. New episodes drop every Wednesday. I'm John Holl, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.